Hi, everybody. This is Matt.
And this is Steve.
And welcome to Marvel Reread Club. All right, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of February 1968. We are still whistling in the dark here and pretending that the apocalypse is not about to hit us in terms of Marvel suddenly massively increasing the number of books they publish every month. And what on earth is that going to do to this podcast? Are we just going to have to start doing 3 parts to every month? Or is there another solution? We have not figured it out yet. But hey, man, that's still like, 3 months away. So we're all good, man. Nothing bad's ever going to happen to us. So welcome back to our special guest, Douglas Wolk. Douglas Wolk is the author of All the Marvels, a book in which he read every single Marvel comic ever. So he is the ultimate all-time expert on the sort of things we're doing on this podcast. Welcome, Douglas.
Good to be back here.
Yes. So, Douglas, last issue I asked you what your all-time favorite Marvel comic was and why was it Dakota North. You then explained it's not Dakota North. So I guess my next question is, why not Dakota North? Because I absolutely love Dakota North. Dakota North, we should explain, was just a short-lived 5-issue comic that Marvel did in the 80s by a writer named Martha Thomases and penciled inked by a very bizarre penciler named Tony Salmons. And it was about a private investigator in the fashion world, and I absolutely love that comic.
We both did, actually. So I'm like, is this a dig at me that you're doing here?
No.
Because I also loved the book.
Okay, so this is my number one question for you, Douglas, before we jump into the second half of the books of February 1968. Did you also like it? And it sounds like you're saying you are a fan of Dakota North.
I do very much like Dakota North. Martha Thomases is really interesting. She was Norman Mailer's personal assistant for a while. She was a publicist to DC for a while. She's one of these people like Ann Nesenti, who has had a super interesting life outside of comics as well as a super interesting life inside of comics.
Really?
I'm
cool.
I'm not familiar with Ann Nesenti's story either, but I definitely like her as a writer and an editor.
I will say that Ann Nesenti has, among other things, besides working at Marvel, she was the editor of Prison Life magazine for a while. She was the editor of a screenwriters magazine for a while. She made a documentary about falconry in the Balkans. She has taught filmmaking in Haiti. And she's... Yeah.
What?
Yeah. No, she's super interesting. If you ever get a chance to see her at a convention or whatever, just talk to her. She is interesting no matter what subject she is talking about.
Wow, I will need to keep an eye out for her at a convention and indeed ask her about some of those things. That's wild.
Well, we should go ahead and jump back in with the second half of the books from February 1968. Let's go ahead and do Fantastic Four number 71, sizzling big action issue. So I've been complaining incessantly for the last 4 issues about the fact that this has been a 4-issue Mad Thinker storyline that never should have been 4 issues long. I've also been complaining that the giant android who they are fighting in this storyline is very generic. He's just a big green dude. Indeed, we have another multi-panel cover, just like Kirby did on his other book, Thor, this month. We have 4 panels of the Fantastic Four fighting the giant generic green android dude, and it's fine. I like the lettering a lot for sizzling big action issue. It's a perfectly fine cover, but it's not great. We jump into the issue, and so it ends. Finally, the end of this epic 4-issue storyline. One of the greatest action thrillers ever produced by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby. Embellishment, Joe Sinnott, lettering, Sam Rosen. We begin with sort of an atypically unattractive close-up of Sue's face. To be fair, she's not feeling very attractive right now. She is entirely freaking out. She thinks she has just found her husband and best friends all dead. But we then get a second splash page as she then looks to see the android standing over their seemingly dead bodies. She turns invisible, which helps her for a little bit, and she manages to grab a big badass Reed gun, Reed's Electroforce beam, which is helping and manages to cause some real damage to the android. But the android does eventually figure out how to turn on X-ray specs and be able to see her even when she is invisible. But then Ben wakes up and Ben is fine. Ben is no longer turned evil by the Mad Thinker's machinations as he had been before. As always, a good blow in the head can solve just about anything in the Marvel Universe. So then they get into a big fight for several pages. Sue is once again using her powers in various badass ways. She is able to protect Ben from the android. Mr. Fantastic wakes up and starts wailing on Ben for a while, completely unconvinced that he's turned good before they finally realize it. Johnny is still in his civvies, another thing I've been complaining endlessly about for the last 4 issues. They knock the android down to the street for a little bit, but it wakes up and it can fly, it seems, and it goes back up to continue the fight.
I'll point out that when the android is knocked out of the wall, the android and like a whole bunch of huge chunks of concrete and rubble are just plummeting down to street level. And no one is concerned at all about what might be below this this rain of rocks and debris.
Yes. The battle basically goes on for a massive amount of more pages. Eventually, Reed figures out that if this guy's going to keep rampaging through my lab, then eventually I might just shove him through the store into the negative zone. I don't know if this ever comes up again. Douglas, do you know if it ever comes up again?
I don't recall if that android ever comes up. That android is so generic that I can't remember if we ever see it again.
Exactly. You wouldn't even know. The super adaptoid ends up in the negative zone at some point, and then he comes back in an absolutely fantastic issue of Marvel 2-in-1, where you get Annihilus and Blastar and the super adaptoid all in the negative zone. For all we know, the Man Thinker's android was there that whole time as well, and everybody was just ignoring him because he's such a generic, useless character. Crystal goes in and finds Sue, who is somewhat the worse for wear, and of course is pregnant. Eventually, Reed and Sue sort of come to a somewhat natural conclusion here. Well, I guess basically Reed does, because Sue has passed out again. And Reed's like, yeah, we're going to have to break up the Fantastic Four. Me and Sue got to leave. We can't keep doing this if she's pregnant, which is somewhat logical. And they're like, continued, we hope. This is one of the more believable cliffhangers they've had in this comic, because they really have reached sort of an impasse in this book. Indeed, it will never make a ton of sense for Sue to be leaving behind her baby, who will gradually age up to be like 16 or however old he is now, at a pace of about one. I don't know what, Douglas, at some point they established that there is an official scale in terms of how much time is passing in the Marvel Universe as opposed to passing in our universe. And it's all based on how old Franklin is.
They sort of do, but the problem is that Franklin doesn't age the way that normal babies age, because Franklin is very special. Franklin ages up, Franklin ages down. Franklin remains 4.5 years old for a very, very, very long time. The implication at some point is that Franklin understands that once he gets to be of a certain age, it's going to be a big problem for everybody. So he decides that he's just going to be a little kid for a good long time, and nobody else around him is going to notice. And in fact, nobody else around him is going to perceptibly age for a while either. It has been pointed out actually by the Zach site guy, I don't remember his name, that time proceeds more or less normally in the Marvel Universe from the beginning of Fantastic Four until Franklin is born, at which point it starts going at a very different pace than publication. I should also note that I did just look it up, and the Mad Thinker's battle android, as opposed to his awesome android, this is the not so awesome android. This particular Mad Thinker android does show up again in 1977 in an issue of Fantastic Four with 6 credited writers.
Yeah.
Always a good sign.
Yes. Okay. I think that was one of my first issues of Fantastic Four. I remember it was like Thomas and Wolfman and Mantlo and various other people who were all sitting around the office. And I think I do remember that issue. Occasionally at my comic book store, when they would remainder issues, they would cut off the corner of the cover.
Oh, right.
Or cut off the corner of the whole book. And I would occasionally buy really cheap back issues with the whole top corner of every page cut off. And I had an old Fantastic Four with the corners cut off in which it had 6 writers. So I think that's the issue you're talking about. But even then, I don't remember this android in it because this android is so forgettable and generic.
Wow, I had totally forgotten about that cut off corner thing. But now that you say that, I'm like, oh, yeah. This android, like the one thing that's at all interesting about it, and which is just sort of weird, is that it's got jets in its back so that if it ends up on its back, it can get up more easily.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. That's your superpower? That's fine. But then page 14. So when we were growing up, Matt, we were of the generation of kids who would see everybody fawning about Kirby and being like, what's the big deal? Because we would see Kirby's art from the 70s and 80s and sort of project from that all of the Now, let's just go ahead and say decline of his art style back onto his early stuff. Whereas I think the people who grew up with his art would project what they loved about that forward to the stuff that then Jack Kirby was doing in the 70s and 80s. That's my supposition there. Well, in terms of that transition of what he was like in the 60s versus what he ended up being like in the 70s, I find page 14, panel 3, to be an example of where we're starting to get some of that weird stiffness that you get in, because people would always tell me about, like, oh yeah, well, Kirby's art is just so dynamic and energetic, and his figures are just so, and I would see Kirby's stuff that looks sort of like this panel 3, page 14, where you see Mr. Fantastic running towards the viewer, and he's sort of hunched over, but it looks like you've posed an action figure in a running pose and are just sort of bouncing it forward to show it running when you're playing with your action figures. It does not really have that energetic look to me. It has more of that stiff 70s Kirby look to me. Either of you have any thoughts about my dissertation here about this?
Yeah, how do you feel about that, Douglas?
I absolutely see that. I think that part of that is a product of what I talked about a little bit on the last episode, which is that a couple months before this, Marvel had reduced the size of its original art. So Kirby is now drawing smaller than he had been before. He doesn't have as big a canvas to work on. And I don't know if you've seen pictures of his pencils from the mid-60s, but they're gorgeous. And more than anything else, Kirby models everything. There's depth and gradations of gray on every single figure, and there's no way to turn that into black lines.
Right.
Joe Sinnott is as close as you come, but if you look at Kirby's pencils from around this period and then see, there's no way that anybody could turn it into something that could reproduce his clear lines without losing a lot of what he was doing that was special. And so you end up with things where, like that pose of Reed Richards, where if it's all sort of gray shades and it's all modeled, like, it looks a lot more natural than if you have to just turn it into ink lines.
Yeah.
Maybe. I would have to see, just this has more to do with the posing rather than the rendering or shading.
And also, if you're suddenly having to cramp your pencils down smaller than they used to get to spread out on the page, I can see how that might affect things.
Well, as your eyesight is deteriorating, which, his was. I mean, just from regular age, I know how my eyesight is going downhill at this age, but he was apparently having some more issues. Yeah, I can see that if you hit that and the smaller page size as a 1-2 punch, that can really knock you for a loop. But this is still just little glimpses of those issues that I'm having here at this point. Nothing dire has happened yet at this point. I'm just seeing this and being like, that looks like the Kirby that I didn't like when I was a kid. But that's just me. So, shall we move on to Strange Tales?
Yes.
Strange Tales, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Doctor Strange. We spoke a few episodes ago about how in the hot bunked books, as the term we were using then, they're starting to do this thing where they're alternating which one of the characters is sort of the star of the book and which one is the backup of the book, which they hadn't been doing until the last couple of months. So in this case here, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. has the big banner logo and has the action that's going on the cover. So behold the savage sky, and we see an armored figure completely covered in armor, including the face. It looks a little bit actually like the Dreadnought, but is wearing a claw belt on here. Oh, and Douglas, because the term Yellow Claw basically has an inherently racist bent to it, we have been referring to him either as the Claw or, and I'm presuming that you know about this, and years later they would then retcon this to say that his actual name was the Golden Claw because he was descended from the rulers of the Golden Horde.
I love that.
But it was just racist white people that then turned that into the Yellow Claw. So we're referring to him either as just the Claw or as the Golden Claw.
You got it.
So, behold the savage sky. One thing I notice on this splash page, we see Dum Dum Dugan in a high-tech sort of spacesuit looking thing. And is it just me, or does this look very much like the cover of an upcoming issue of S.H.I.E.L.D. that is very famous and has been homaged many times since?
Yes.
Yeah, it really does.
So it's the cover where, I want to call him Kirby, where Fury is in a very similar outfit to this out in space. So this looks very much like a prefiguration of that design that he will later do. And while it's still fresh in our mind, Smilin' Stan Lee editor, jaunty Jim Steranko writer/artist, fearless Frank Giacoia inker, swingin' Sam Rosen letterer. So if you don't like this ish, you know to whom to address the letters. So we once again still have Jim Steranko not inking himself. I had completely forgotten, or I guess maybe never known, that Jim Steranko just wasn't inking himself for like at least, the last 6 issues here or something like that?
3 or 4, I think.
Which I find very surprising, since a lot of what I find that he brings that's so innovative to comics I saw in his inking, in the finishes that he was doing. But apparently it's not just that. So we get a spectacular double-page splash.
Well, we should say that first we get a 1-page splash followed by a 2-page splash, but Dum Dum Dugan is back. We have Dum Dum Dugan leading the charge to save Nick Fury, and Dum Dum Dugan had been basically written out of the book about 8 issues ago. He's been back assisting Nick Fury over in the pages of Captain America, and now he's finally back in the main book as well.
That's a very good point. I had forgotten that he had been written out of here in this book because he, as you said, he keeps on showing up in Tales of Suspense. So we get a spectacular double-page splash of the helicarrier coming up alongside the Claw's spindly, insectoid-looking ship that is just utterly unique, that we just fawned over in the previous episodes. There is sort of like a pirate boarding party kind of thing going on, but in the air with high-tech floaty stuff going on, and it really just is mind-blowing. It's really, really fantastic. So, S.H.I.E.L.D. is making its way onto this ship and is starting to disrupt what's going on with the Claw's plans to destroy Manhattan. In the midst of all of this, Fury is able to get himself loose from the death trap that he had been placed in and is able to attack Herr Holtzmann. We get to see Holtzmann's face without his cool sunglasses on and see that one of his eyes is deformed and really frightening looking. Page 7, we get something that, once again, I'm assuming that Jim Steranko went ahead and did this finished part before handing it off to be inked. There is a nice moire pattern that's used as an effect for some mental trick that he's using, it looks like, on some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Does everybody know what I mean when I say a moire pattern? Do you think I should explain that?
Yes, I think you should.
So a moire pattern, it's when you take one regular pattern and another regular pattern and you put them sort of on top of each other but offset slightly. It can create these weird kind of psychedelic looking kinds of waves and ripples and stuff like that in the final piece. It sort of creates these optical illusions, as it were. Steranko becomes famous for these moire patterns that he uses in part of his art and storytelling, and this might be the first actual moire pattern we've seen him use. I could be proven wrong on that.
I can confirm that it is.
Okay.
There's a book that James Romberger wrote called Steranko, the Self-Created Man, which is mostly an interview with Steranko, but also includes Romberger and Steranko walking through every issue that Steranko drew and picking out the visual innovations of that issue.
Wow, that sounds great.
And the one that they single out for this particular issue is that moire pattern.
Okay. So Steve did get a chance to speak to Jim Steranko at a convention, and Jim Steranko said that he was responsible for 150 comic book innovations. And he said, and guess how many comic book innovations were around before me? And guess what the number was, Douglas?
I don't know, 12?
0. There had been no comic innovations before Jim Steranko.
That's amazing.
And he literally pokes me in the chest as he says, 0. 0.
That's wow.
By the way, also, do you have any thought on Steranko stating that this 12-issue storyline we're in the middle of here is the first 12-issue storyline done at Marvel?
Yes, he is wrong, and he knows perfectly well that there is an earlier one. It's the serial in Strange Tales that Ditko did in Strange Tales.
Right.
With Doctor Strange.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a couple of issues from now, we will see Steranko specifically swiping a panel from it. So he was definitely aware of it, even if he became unaware of it later on.
Deliberately so, I would think. Okay, because, he also says that he wrote the first that he created, I should say, the first graphic novel. And he has some kind of excuse as to why Contract with a God does not count.
Right, yep.
Sounds about right. Yes, the Claw is able to escape, even though S.H.I.E.L.D. has been able to take over his ship. We see Nick Fury has a slingshot, like a high-tech slingshot, that he's using against the thing that we saw on the cover, the robotic-looking claw android-looking thing. Or is that a person in there?
I don't think it is an android. I think that's simply the Claw wearing something that covers his whole body. Because then you see...
Oh, yep, you're right.
He raises his visor on the final page, and we see that he's inside that thing.
You're correct, yes. And then we see the unnaturally yellow skin underneath there, and the long fingernails sticking out from the gloves. I don't know why the gloves retract, just to show you that. The Claw defeats Fury in hand-to-hand combat, and then is heading off in some kind of escape ship that, once again, is just spectacular Steranko tech. And he is laughing maniacally as we see the disembodied eyes of him looking down at the defeated Fury. And so next month, Retribution. So, thoughts about this story before we move on to the next half?
Two thoughts. One thought is reading Steranko for the plot is always going to be disappointing. The other one is that I'm not sure when exactly Steranko started coloring the Nick Fury feature, but I'm pretty sure he is this time. If you look at page 5, the sort of red to orange to yellow gradation that he does, like that is one of his favorite tricks, and those are a few of his favorite shades. The way that he handles color for the rest of the story is very, very, very Steranko-y.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the great shames of this whole era of Marvel Comics is that for some reason they didn't credit the colorist. Why on earth not? I think that Marie Severin, who did most of the coloring, it would have been great to get her all the credit she deserved. And for comics like this, which we suspect are being colored by other people or being colored by the artists who penciled and inked them, or in this case just penciled and not inked, it's just a real shame that people weren't getting credit. And I have no idea why. Why, Douglas? Why weren't they giving the colorist credit?
Because they didn't know who was going to color it until after the lettering was done.
That's interesting.
That would make sense.
Still, that's no excuse.
Well, if it's actually impossible, then that might be an excuse.
Well, they could have left it blank and filled it in at the last second. Obviously, they eventually figured out how to do it. Within 5 years, they're giving coloring credits. So if they could figure it out then, they could have figured it out here. But it's really bogus.
Okay, so let's move on to Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts, The Mystic and the Machine. From the Forbidden Files of Stan Lee comes this halcyon hallucinatory happening, tensely told by Jim Lawrence, pipe dreamed and pictured by Dan Adkins, lettered behind locked doors by Al Kurzrock. Douglas, are you familiar with the writer Jim Lawrence?
I'm really not. I don't know what he did outside of a tiny bit of stuff for Doctor Strange.
Well, so he was one of the writers on one of the incarnations of Tom Swift. He wrote, I believe, Matt, didn't we determine he wrote the James Bond newspaper strip for a while?
Yes, he did the James Bond comic strip for years and years and years.
Ooh.
And he fought in the international brigades in the Spanish Civil War.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's kind of a badass. I'm very, very impressed. So, as we've talked about, Doctor Strange has not been able to take a nap or a leak or anything else like that for about the past 18 issues here or something like that. He is now trying to rescue Victoria Bentley from the Scientist Supreme, who is on this world that is mostly a jungle world, but there is some kind of a high-tech fortress behind which which the Scientist Supreme is working. Page 2 has a really interesting panel layout. Dan Adkins really likes tall vertical panels, but then this looks like a 9-panel page, except the 3 panels on the left merge together into one big tall panel. I just always find his page layouts to be quite interesting.
Yeah.
There's really not that much that goes on in this story. Doctor Strange is trying to get into the Scientist Supreme's lair in order to confront him. The Scientist Supreme thinks that his science is so great that the magic will not be able to do anything to it, but in the end he is wrong. Doctor Strange is able to get in. They get into a physical fight at one point, and at the very end, when Doctor Strange thinks he has defeated the Scientist Supreme, in comes this giant robot, and Matt, you shared with me where this robot on the final splash page was cribbed from. Can you give us more information about that?
We've talked about how Atkins had this feeling that he had been told by Stan Lee that he should be swiping every single panel of his original Doctor Strange penciling and inking issues from old Ditko comics. But he wasn't just swiping from old Ditko comics. He was also swiping from sci-fi paperbacks and sci-fi pulp magazines that he stole 2 notable covers from that first issue, including the design of, what was his name, Nebulos, was stolen directly from the cover of an old science fiction paperback. Well, as soon as I got to the end of this issue, he's like, "Gaze, Earthling, upon Voltorr." And as soon as I looked at it, I'm like, that's not Voltorr. That's the walking, talking, I don't care man. Who was... I am interested in old pulp covers, especially bizarre pulp covers. I used to feature them on my blog. And this was from the cover of, I guess it was quite new at the time. This was Amazing Stories from June 1965. And it featured a story by Dave Bunch called The Walking, Talking, I Don't Care Man. The cover is actually painted by Gray Morrow, who would go on to become a Marvel artist himself, but at this point was doing sci-fi pulp magazine covers. Once again, Adkins has only slightly modified it to be in this issue. It's almost like, is this a swipe or is this an homage? I mean, surely if this issue had just been published 2 years earlier and Amazing Stories was still a major, factor in the sci-fi world, was he assuming that people would recognize it and recognize it as an homage? But it doesn't really follow the rules of homage. It really is a swipe. Anyway, pretty shameless. So it shows that Adkins has not entirely stopped his swiping ways.
Yes. So just a couple of things that I'll point out about the story. At one point, the Scientist Supreme says, "By the 9th theorem of antimatter, Strange's magical bolts have destroyed the disintegrator itself." The writers in early Marvel Comics go a little too far sometimes in trying to come up with these things. And then at one point, Doctor Strange, who is often talking about the shades of the seraphim, at this point says, "Shuddering shades of the seraphim." I'm like, ooh, yeah, no.
Oh, dear.
Don't do that. Exactly. Oh, dear. Yes. That is well said. But yeah, overall, nothing much happens in this issue. Just, the scientist thinks that his science can keep the magician out. The magician is able to get in, and then he is confronted by yet another giant menace that he needs to take care of before he can finally make it to a bathroom.
Yes, but he never will.
This is just such a visually boring story. And that is the fatal sin that a Doctor Strange story can commit. Like, Doctor Strange stories have to show us something that we would never, ever otherwise see. And you could draw Iron Man over every Doctor Strange figure in this story, and it would be the same story.
Yeah, good point.
That's interesting. I end my notes by saying, forgettable issue with only meaningful plot escalation being a big swipe. And it's fine. I think that the idea of having him fight a Scientist Supreme is interesting. It's interesting. The one time we see Victoria Bentley, she's colored the same as Doctor Strange is when he's in his astral form. She's colored in blue and white for some reason. I don't know if there's something supposed to be going on with her. I really like Adkins' inking on this issue. It really reminds me quite a bit of Keith Giffen, later 80s era Keith Giffen. Keith Giffen never has a run on Doctor Strange, but he does have 2 runs on Dr. Fate, and it sort of reminds me of Keith Giffen's later Dr. Fate work.
Okay. The last thing we have here in the issue is just the next gripping-ish, The Ancient One lives. So the Ancient One has been dead for about the last year. It sounds like he's already coming back, possibly, although there are quote marks around the word lives. So we will see what that actually means.
Yes. Douglas, did you have anything else to add?
No.
All right, let's go and go on to Tales of Suspense number 98. So we'll see when they get to issue 100, if they celebrate that, just like they seem to have celebrated in Tales to Astonish. Tales of Suspense, Captain America and Iron Man, number 98, Cap versus the Panther, and we have a big cover.
I have a thing to say about this cover, actually.
What's that?
This cover, the caption at the bottom says Cap versus the Panther. The original artwork for this issue was on display in the big Marvel Comics history art show that went around to a bunch of museums a couple years ago. And the original art says Cap versus the Black Panther.
Really?
But this was just about the moment when the Black Panther Party was becoming a big thing. And it was much more in the headlines, and there was a last-second decision to change the cover.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I know that eventually they're the Black Panthers keep getting more and more press, and so then they tried changing his name to the Black Leopard for a while.
Yeah.
And then they eventually give up and bring him back to the Black Panther. But that is fascinating. So you have seen the original cover and saw that it originally said Black Panther.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Once again, they're now switching off who takes the lead in each book, depending on who has the cover. So this is the first time that Captain America has ever had the lead in this book. It says, The Claws of the Panther, the latest and possibly the greatest creation of the award-winning Stan the Manly and Jack King Kirby, embellished by Joe Sinnott, lettered by Artie Simek. So it's been absolutely wonderful having Sinnott now inking Kirby on virtually everything, having him inking Kirby on Fantastic Four, Captain America, and the Inhumans feature in Thor, except for Womp Womp, the Thor feature itself, which is still being inked by Vince Scotta. When last issue we left off, Captain America had a ship land on his roof saying, I want to take you to Wakanda, or sometimes they say the Wakandas. And he's like, hop in this plane, it'll take you there. Now he's going the plane. And then suddenly a giant laser comes from space and tries to kill him while he's flying. A blistering ray from somewhere in space. It just missed the ship by inches. Captain America lands and, for no reason, gets in a big fight with the Black Panther. And this is really not explained at all, but it's just the rule of comics. You have to talk to each other. Interesting, he is calling him the Black Panther on the inside. He says, from all I've heard, all I've read about the Black Panther, I took a calculated gamble, decided to trust him. So he's still being called the Black Panther on the inside, just not on the cover. The most annoying thing about this issue to me is that Black Panther is like, yes, I summoned you here for a particular reason. There was a reason why you need to help me defeat this villain, but I won't tell you what that reason is. Captain America's like, why? Why me? Why did you bring me here? And he's like, where is it? Here on page 5, he says, but who put it in orbit there and for what purpose? Why don't you answer? There's something you're not telling me. And the Black Panther says, you are most perceptive, my friend, but I cannot name the one who is our enemy, for you would not believe. You must be patient. Before very long, you shall see him with your own eyes. So this is kind of like Glinda the Good Witch here, going why didn't you tell me I could just tap my heels together 3 times and send me home? It's like, because you would not believe. Black Panther doesn't tell him, and I'll just go ahead and jump to the end of the issue. It turns out that the thing Black Panther was not telling him is that Baron Zemo is seemingly back to life and has been attacking Wakanda, and Black Panther has, logically enough, been saying, this is not my problem. This is Captain America's problem. I am going to call in Captain America to deal with this, and yet not tell him what's going on until he actually gets to see Zemo face-to-face, figuring that that's the only time he would believe it. Meanwhile, Sharon Carter, who has still not been named Sharon Carter, is still called Agent 13, has just by sheer coincidence also been assigned to go work on this same case. It would have been so easy to plot this more efficiently, where Sharon Carter is intentionally sent to go back up Captain America, or Captain America is intentionally sent to go back up Sharon Carter. But nope, it's sheer coincidence, or as Stan Lee sometimes likes to call it in his caption writing, the fickle finger of fate has brought them together. It's fine, whatever. Comics are allowed one giant coincidence per issue, and that's the giant coincidence in this issue. Anyway, Douglas, what do you think of this issue?
It's a lot of action. There's a whole lot of action in both the stories. Boy, does the action never let up, because there's action.
Yes. But that's good, right? We like action.
It's true. We like other things too, but sometimes that is the particular flavor of cake you need.
Yes.
Yes. Captain America in particular generally tends to be all action.
Yes.
In the case of the Iron Man story, just to give a little preview of it, literally nothing happens in this Iron Man story. We end exactly where we begin. It is an 11-page, mostly fight scene drawn by Gene Colan that begins with Iron Man seemingly at the mercy of Whiplash and ends with Iron Man seemingly at the mercy of Whiplash. And the only thing that happens in between is there's a mysterious woman who will later turn out to be Whitney Frost, a.k.a. Madame Mask. Spoilers.
I wondered that.
Okay.
I've never read these comics, so I didn't know that was going to happen. That is fascinating. Okay. Yeah. She gets a nice little introduction. So well, let's go ahead and you're completely stealing my thunder here, and you've jumped us over to Iron Man, and you're already summarized the issue.
Sorry.
I will just back you up briefly. The Warrior and the Whip, you know how we hate to brag, but how can we help it when smiling Stan Lee and genial Gene Colan have co-produced an epic extravaganza like this, ably accompanied by Frank Giacoya, inker, and Artie Simek, letterer? As you ably summed up already, Douglas, we get a massive 11-page fight between Whiplash and Iron Man, which has made no progress by the end of the issue. He's still seemingly at the mercy of Whiplash at the end of the issue, just like he was at the beginning. There is a brief moment in their fight where Iron Man has a little illusion projecting machine. He's sort of borrowing a page from Doctor Strange's book, where he suddenly creates a bunch of illusions of himself, and he can actually throw his voice to them as well, so that Whiplash does not know who to whip, but he does eventually figure out what's going on. As you said, there's a funny bit where Jasper Sitwell is like, wait a second, you just handed Iron Man over to Tony Stark's cousin, and you just handed the entire dude over? And it's like, don't you know he's a bad guy? And they're like, no, we didn't know that. And then he's like, he checks in with S.H.I.E.L.D., and they're like, yeah, we're putting his name in our computer. Yep, he's bad. He's always in hock to the mafia. And they're like, oh, great. And so then a bunch of girls show up, and this is sort of like a humorous sequence where they all show up, and they're like, we're all Tony Stark's girlfriends, and we all demand that you find Tony Stark for us. And then one of them, who is especially beautiful with sort of raven hair, thinks to herself, I am far more than a friend. And I did wonder if this was going to turn out to be Madame Mask, pre-Mask. So I guess at some point her face becomes scarred, but not yet.
Right.
Okay. I didn't know she ever was pre-scarred. I didn't know she ever was non-masked.
There's also a letter in this issue by Bob Gale, who would go on to be a Spider-Man writer.
Yes, Bob Gale, who was just 16 years old at the time. This is his hometown, so this has got to be the same guy. He would later go on to co-write the movie Back to the Future.
Oh, wow.
And would eventually be brought on as a Spider-Man writer post Brand New Day, when Spider-Man was a weekly book for a while. And they had a lot of writers who were all working together. He was one of them. And yes, we have Bob Gale showing up here in the letters column. Steve, did you have any thoughts on this issue?
Not particularly, but I just want to ask Douglas if he would mind trying to describe what is going on with Whiplash's whole pants situation there. Wondered if you could take a shot at
it. I can't even begin. It's tights under some sort of like failed attempt at a kilt. Like why somebody who has a whip would want to have clothing that flies around very loosely. It's a Gene Colan thing. I do not understand.
Yes. Okay.
It's a Gene Colan thing you wouldn't understand. As I say in my notes, ends with him facing off just like last issue ended. No progress, but it was a fun issue nonetheless. And letter from Bob Gale.
Okay, so let's move on to Avengers. Then after Avengers, we will do Not Brand for the first time.
Yes.
So, Avengers, Mine is the Power. And we have a John Buscema cover here with a giant Magneto head and hands seeming to be playing Pietro and Wanda like marionettes as the rest of the Avengers are all reaching out towards them, trying to do something about it. So, Mine is the Power, and Power is full-on Artie Simek. Every last line is vibrating in that word. Stan Lee takes particular pride in presenting this Roy Thomas, John Buscema cataclysmic, cataphonic co-creation, lettered by what's-his-name, Artie Simek. Hear ye, when Stan and Roy saw the pulsatin' pencils for this action-packed ish, they insisted that nobody could do justice in inking them but artist Big John Buscema himself. So hang on, frenzied ones. Avengerdom will never be the same again. So we have John Buscema inking himself here. And I like this, although John Buscema inking John Buscema he has better inkers, I will say. But
Yeah.
overall, this is really interesting to get to see this.
Yeah, I agree. He would occasionally ink himself on Savage Sword of Conan over the years, which I recently reread all of his Savage Sword of Conan books, and he was never my favorite inker on himself, but I think he does a very good job, and I think he may be the best inker he's had so far in this book, because he's been inked by George Bell, George Tuska, and I think John Tartaglione maybe for an issue.
I think Vince Colletta inked him, right?
Yeah, I think Colletta's inked him as well. So, Tuska did a pretty good job inking him, but I think that him inking himself is the best thing he's had so far in this book. Soon they'll bring in Palmer, who has an even better inker on him than he himself is.
Oh, yeah, no, Palmer is just perfection over him. So we start off in Olympus. We get to see beardless Hercules, which makes me cry, in the abandoned Olympus, trying to figure out what was going on. And he is attacked by Typhon. Now, I went and looked up Typhon, and he is one of, well, depends on which Greek myths you listen to. He's either one of the Titans or a son of Zeus who, was bad or something like that. But one way or the other, he is an enemy to most of the gods, but he is a monster. Like, why they decide to do him as just a warrior in armor rather than a snake-legged creature, I don't know. I mean, that would have been really awesome looking.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when Cerberus showed up and he was basically just a troll. And it's like, no, he's a 3-headed dog. Come on, people. But yeah, so Typhon, we could have had a big monster with snakes for legs. But instead, we got this, which is okay. So anyway, we find out that Typhon was, an enemy to the gods. He comes to Olympus. He's able to whisk them all away. Is it to Limbo? One way or the other. He's able to send the Olympic gods to some other place, and they're not here anymore. The rest of the Avengers are hanging out in Avengers Mansion. They are arguing about various stuff. We don't really need to get into the specifics of it too much, but we do see that Jan is wearing a really mod kind of dress. It's like a little black cocktail dress with little rectangular mirrors bedazzled all over the thing, which...
okay, I hadn't realized those were mirrors. That's even cooler. It kind of looks like it's covered in Post-it notes, but I really like it. It's a really swinging dress.
I guess I was reading that as like the kinds of little metal foil things that you see on various stuff from that era. Yeah, one way or the other, that's how I read it. And John was setting himself a little bit of a challenge in how to ink that, and he did it quite well.
Yeah.
Giant Man / Ant-Man is saying that he is going to be leaning more into the Ant-Man thing these days, but he's going to be keeping his costume more Giant Man. Goliath, whatever you want to call him, okay, fine. Just make up your minds and figure something out.
Yeah.
Magneto, meanwhile, still has Wanda and Pietro partially prisoner, partially sort of being strung along into possibly wondering if they want to join him. The Toad does not like them being around. He likes having Magneto all to himself. So we get to see Magneto's lair where he's got all these weapons that might be able to destroy humanity. Wanda is definitely, we don't want to join you. Pietro is like, I don't know, man, the humans do hate me, and it's not like I got much love for them, so I'm not sure. So Magneto is like, well, I tell you what, I will try to make peace with the humans. Let's see if we can live together in harmony. I will go to the United Nations and barge right on in and say, I must address the United Nations and say, here are my demands, meet them and we can have peace, do not meet them and we will be at war. We get a little bit of the beefing going on back and forth between Warsaw Pact countries and NATO countries here.
Yeah, the art of the Soviet speaker who is speaking before the United Nations is very specific. That looks like an actual dude's face, which makes me wonder, did John Buscema actually look up what the Soviet ambassador to the United Nations looked like? Or is he just basing this on a friend of his or something? But there's some sort of human model to this guy.
Magneto is proposing to the UN that essentially mutants be given their own sovereign nation in order to have their own safe homeland. But he's asking this in a way that seems to be threatening them, and everyone's like, we won't take threats. And so they're about to get into a fight, and he's about to be able to prove to Pietro that, see, I tried to deal with them, and they wouldn't listen. But then the Avengers show up, and they start fighting Magneto and Toad. Wanda gets grazed by a bullet from a guard, but the guard did not mean to fire. This is being done by Magneto, once again, to try and get Pietro's sympathies on his side. So he went ahead and had Wanda injured. So Pietro is indeed rather upset, let me just say that. And yeah, so they end up leaving with Magneto. The rest of the Avengers, Jan and Hank and Clint, are all pretty dejected because they're like, well, Captain America has quit. We just lost Wanda and Pietro to Magneto. Hercules has disappeared. You know, what are we doing here? Like, is this, maybe this thing's over and we just need to admit it to ourselves. And we then cut back to Olympus, where Hercules continues his battle with Typhon, then some other beast that ends up being drawn into the same battle. Oh yeah, so it is Limbo. On page 19, Hercules says, "'Tis Typhon, he who hath exiled the immortals to some dread limbo, who is truly the enemy." So
maybe not the limbo, but at least a limbo.
Well, anytime they call anything a limbo, it becomes limbo eventually. I am sure that some later story ended up writing this disappearance into limbo into the same limbo that we always end up seeing. I can't imagine that they didn't. So in the end of the issue, Hercules is then also transported to limbo, and Typhon sits upon Zeus's throne in Olympus, and next he looks to conquest Earth. So next incredible-ish, a Titan strides the land. Overall, as you were saying, Matt, this is probably the best inking job we've had for John Buscema so far, even though John Buscema really is not the best inker on John Buscema throughout his career, but it's fun to get to see. I wish we had gotten to see a Typhon that looked more like a monster. I wish that Hercules would finally go ahead and grow his beard back, because I really dislike beardless Hercules. And yeah, I'm interested to see where this ends up going with Wanda and Pietro still taking back up with Magneto here.
Yeah, I thought that this was a really nice issue. I'm just really digging all these storylines. I'm digging the Hercules Typhon storyline. I think that, you can sort of believe, given where Quicksilver's head has been at recently, you can sort of believe that he wouldn't put two and two together here and figure out, like, oh, right, Wanda gets shot in the head by an errant bullet. Maybe that bullet was made errant by Magneto, and he just doesn't put that together. They've sort of been building up to that nicely in terms of Quicksilver gradually getting his head in the wrong space, and you can kind of believe it, that then he does essentially rejoin Magneto here, and Wanda is just unconscious, so she isn't there for the whole thing. And then at the end, Typhon's going to attack New York, and it all starts coming together. I really like this issue, and really like Buscema's inks on himself. Douglas, what do you think of this issue?
One thing that I found really interesting about this issue is that the full page splash on page 7 looks very, very much like one of Jack Kirby's collages, except it's all drawn. Like, it is not photo-based at all, or if it's photo-based, it is entirely drawn from photos.
Yeah, I've complained about Buscema Tech in the past, but this is pretty good Buscema Tech. This is his atomic energy, says, let the puny humans toy with primitive atomic energy with imperfect solar batteries. Unfortunately, still imperfect in 2025. It is I who have unlocked the door of the most valuable energy source of all, the secret of magnetically induced perpetual motion. We have a full page of Buscema Tech, and I kind of like it.
There is also some interesting sort of parallels between stuff that happens in this issue and stuff that happens in Krakoa much further down the line.
Huh.
All right.
How so?
Magneto being in on the establishment of a mutant nation, dealing with the UN in his own way. Also his sort of arranging an accident for Wanda, although the second time it happens, it's her idea.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I've not read those issues, so I don't know. Given that they have been doing Marvel Comics continuously for 65 years without ever rebooting, you would figure that eventually they would end up redoing just about every story more than once.
I think when they do it in the Krakoa context, it is with reference to the earlier stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's never been clear to me the degree to which, if you're going to write for Marvel Comics here in the year 2025, is there just an assumption that you have read the last 65 years worth of comics? Like, if you say, like, oh, here's an idea for the Incredible Hulk, let's have him be banished to a crossroads where then he can go through doors to different dimensions. Are people going to look at you like, no, you idiot, we already did that.
Language.
Language. Or is it the sort of thing where they're going to be like, actually, we did that storyline, you wouldn't know about it because it happened 30 years ago? Or like, is there just an assumption that like, oh yeah, you've read them all. You've read all 65 years worth of comics. And like, I don't.
I think there is some institutional memory there. That institutional memory is very often named Tom Brevoort.
So it's Tom Brevoort's job to remember everything that's been done before?
You know, there are people around who keep an eye on stuff. And there's also a lot of creators who will do something that has been done before, but make it deliberately rhyme.
Yeah.
Right.
But surely, I mean, they must have some people there, like at least some people who have not read all 65 years worth of comics. You know,
Oh, yeah.
If Ta-Nehisi Coates says, hey, I'd like to write Captain America, are they going to be like, wait, have you read all 65 years? Like, you know.
Well, Ta-Nehisi Coates almost certainly has read.
Okay, bad example. Surely there must be somebody who is, you know, a big enough deal that they're allowed to write for Marvel Comics without knowing everything that's been done previously. Which I realize is offensive to you, Douglas, because if you put in the work and you don't even work there, then it's the least that should be asked of them.
Shall we look at Not Brand Ec?
Yes, let's look at Not Brand Ec.
Yes. So as we mentioned, this is our first time looking at this particular book as we try to manage how we do these episodes. We had talked about doing Not Brand Ec, or at least the first issue, like we did with Sergeant Fury. We did the first issue and then left it behind. But we were too busy that month and did not get it in. So this is our first time really looking at this. At your special request, we decided to go ahead and do it.
All right. So I am so happy, Douglas, that you got us to read this book, because this is a fantastic book. I went ahead and read the first issue when it came out and really liked it, but I didn't stay with the book. I haven't been reading it because we haven't been discussing it. Well, this is the Big Baddie Love and Hisses issue, starring Spidey-Man, the Human Scorch, the Unhumans, Dr. Derange, and a mashukana mess of other offbeat oddballs. So we've got 3 love stories in this issue, and they are all delightful. Do you agree, Steve? Did you find this to be delightful?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I found I liked the thematic unity of the whole thing. I found that, for the most part, they were very imaginative. The silly names they give to the characters get a little bit old. Well, not just old. They're a little annoying right off the bat, and I guess they actually kind of grow on me over time, to be more specific.
There's a lot of things in this issue that is also true with Mad Magazine, as is true with anybody who tries to write something that is funny. Then a lot of this stuff isn't really funny. A lot of this stuff is, you know, has the shape of a joke without actually being a joke, without actually having anything funny about it. Like, oh, what if they weren't inhuman? What if they were unhuman? Well, that means the exact same thing as inhuman. So it's not actually a joke at all, but you sort of lock yourself into this thing where you have to act like, you know, everything is something made fun of it. Now that's opposed to referring to Crystal as Gristle. I find that very funny. Like, if I was an inhuman and someone called me an unhuman, that wouldn't be funny because it's not an insult. But if my name was Crystal and somebody called me Gristle, I would be pretty pissed.
Yes. So why don't you go ahead and do the interesting credits here, Matt?
Oh, I'm not going to read all these credits. Okay, I'll go ahead and read them. It says, Not Brand Ec, Art Guarantee, the most hysterical hero sandwich you've ever read. This is a contents page, which sounds very like Yiddishism. It says, Recipe, take a jigger of Stanley, omnipotent overseer, mix well with Solly Brodsky, production manager, add a dash of Roy Thomas and Gary Friedrich, editorial associates, and sprinkle generously with John Verporten, production aide-de-camp. So they're sort of giving credit to people they don't normally give credit to. They don't normally give credit on the page to Saul Brodsky and John Verporten. And then they say the stories will be the Human Scorch has to meet the family with this ring, Ivy Web, and Best Side Story.
I love the splash page here where it's making it into a big love sandwich. And so they actually have the 2 slices of bread and then the thing showing the different stories. But along with that is like an old boot and a fish head and a hand grenade, along with tomatoes and lettuce and stuff.
Yes, it is quite nice. You know, the most amazing thing about this book is you would think they would have their grade C artists on this book because it's just a humor book. But no. We begin with the first story. Let's all blow a kiss to Stan Loverboy Lee and Jack Cupid Doll Kirby for this feeble little fable. So we're like, oh, we've actually got Lee and Kirby. Well, wow, are they actually going to bring in like Sinat to ink it, or are we going to be stuck with Coletta? What's going to happen? Well, then you get to the first big shocker of the issue, embellished and enriched by tender Tom Sutton. lettered and loved by sweet Sammy Rosen. So Tom Sutton would go on to have a nice, interesting Marvel Comics career. I associate him with the Marvel horror comics of the 1970s. And I really like Tom Sutton's inks over Kirby here.
Yeah.
I think they work out really well. I would love to take these panels out of context and go like, here's a panel of seemingly Johnny Torch and Crystal. What issue is this from, and who penciled it, and who inked it? And I think that would be a hell of a Marvel trivia question. But
one thing I'll point out about the splash page with Crystal, or Gristle as we're calling her, notice that her hair decoration thing doesn't look like it's a hairband. It looks more like it's a coloring on her hair. Notice that?
Yeah.
So that is...
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that is what they decided to go with in the awful Inhumans TV show. They did her hair like you see it here, rather than like a headband.
So then we just get a funny little story of what happened if Crystal married the Human Torch, which, of course, they never got to get married in the actual comics. This is the only time we will ever see them get married. And then he had to go meet his in-laws. Of course, this makes no sense. He met them in the same issue, but this is pretending that he never met them and is getting to know them at the same time. And of course, they are really wild in-laws. Of course, my favorite Inhuman, as always, is Lockjaw, and there is really wonderful panel on page 4. He gets covered in food and is desperately trying to find a towel, and instead of a towel, he finds the tongue of Lockjaw. It's a silly boy, that's no towel, it's Loosejaw's tongue. And it says, Loosejaw, the Inhuman's giant wow, he's so dangerous, even his teeth have teeth. And besides, he has fleas. And so then he's running around meeting all of the Unhumans, one by one. And then he decides the only way to solve this is to summon Sandyman. Again, not actually a joke. Calling the Sandman Sandyman is not actually a joke. But summons Sandyman from the beach. For some reason, Cyclops and Scarlet Witch are there. Summons them to fight the Unhumans. And because they're fighting, then that makes everything okay. And that is the end of this story. Little foreshadowing here of when the Human Torch is part of the redemption of Sandman in a wonderful story in Marvel 2-in-1 #1 that's coming up soon. Indeed, the Sandman and Human Torch sort of get along here, and then Sandman's like, I'm going to take you to meet my family. And his family turns out to be Doctor Doom, Atuma, Mole Man, a Skrull, various other evil people. And he says, for this, I got rid of my in-laws. And so then he writes, come back, all is forgiven, Scorchy. Admit it, sweetie, don't you just love a happy ending? I think that Kirby has a tremendous amount of fun drawing this story.
Oh, yeah.
I think that Tom Sutton has a tremendous amount of fun inking it, and Stan Lee has a tremendous amount of fun to the degree he's pawning it and then scripting it. I think this is a wonderful story. Douglas, what do you think of this story?
I really enjoy watching creators parodying themselves deliberately. Mm-hmm. Lee and Kirby got to do it a few times. There's another comedy story that's right around this time, I think in some annual, that is Kirby just writing and drawing himself. But here, it's the two of them mocking themselves, mocking their own characters, mocking their own way of doing things. It's just a blast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so much fun.
You talked about Tom Sutton, page 6, panel 5, with Sandman basically saying, I'm no longer going to be pretending to be a beach here. I'm going to go ahead and pull the beach away from everybody. But just look at the texture of Sandman in that panel.
Yes.
I think I'm vaguely familiar with Tom Sutton's later art career, but that does look like what I think I imagine me thinking Tom Sutton looks like, is some of that that texture that we see there.
Yes, I think this is the best Sandman inking we've ever had. I think that this is just gorgeous Sandman inking. Really looks like he's made of sand. Really nicely done.
And yeah, I did not really notice or put together that we had Cyclops and Scarlet Witch on the beach together. What? It's strange, but yeah, anyway. But yeah, something about the every single square inch of every panel has to have something that is, at least as you said, Matt, has the shape of a joke, if not being a joke, can be a little exhausting. But
oh, yeah.
And you were saying, they would probably not have their A-list people on this. Superhero comics weren't always the only thing that comics did. I'm sure that these people are like, I'm getting a little sick of drawing superheroes every now and then. Can you please put me on Sergeant Fury or on, hey, this new humor book you're doing, so I can do something other than straight superhero comics. Oh, in terms of books that we have come out that we haven't talked about, Matt, didn't Something Savage and his Leatherneck Raiders, didn't issue one of that come out in the last month or so?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, Captain Savage and his Leatherneck Raiders.
Captain Savage.
Yeah, Captain Savage and his Leatherneck Raiders is another Gary Friedrich project, and it's a failed attempt at a war comic. Gary Friedrich went on to write some very interesting and very odd war comics. Notably, when you get to the 70s, you'll get to Combat Kelly and His Deadly Dozen, which notably kills off its entire cast in the final issue horrendously, one by one.
God.
But you were talking about Marvel creators wanting to do a different kind of thing, and a couple years from now, you're going to hit the revivals of Our Love Story and My Love, which for their first few issues, it's Romita, it's the Buscemas, it is everybody who's been doing the superhero books except for Kirby. But you can tell they're so
Kirby, famously the creator of romance comics, correct?
Simon the Kirby, yeah. But he's like, I'm just doing like 2 comics a month by that point. But like, it's a whole lot of Marvel's A-listers, and they're doing gorgeous stuff. You can tell, like, okay, finally, I don't have to draw a fight scene. I can just draw pretty girls crying for 10 pages.
Yeah, you get gorgeous art on Marvel's romance comics in the 70s. You know, you get Steranko back, you get John Romita, you get John Buscema, you get a lot of the top artists doing really beautiful work. And it's completely forgotten today because people don't go back and read those.
You get Jim Starlin at the beginning of his career.
Yeah, Jim Starlin. It's really gorgeous. Okay, well, let's go and move on to the second story in this issue, Best Side Story. I like this one even better. As much as I love Tom Sutton and Jack Kirby, you would think this wouldn't be as good, but I like this even better. This is art that is penciled and inked by Tom Sutton. And I think he's doing an amazing job in this story. Best Side Story, produced by Stan Lee, book and lyrics by Gary Friedrich, based on an idea by Roy Thomas, settings and choreography by Tom Sutton, lettering by L.P. Gregory, first night closing signs by Irving Forbush. I love this story. This is my favorite story in this issue, and this is very indebted to Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine would often do Broadway parodies with rewritten lyrics, and here we have a rewritten parody of West Side Story. And again, calling West Side Story Best Side Story, they're arguing about who has the best side, but that's not really much of a joke. We get a story in which Doctor Strange falls in love with Wonder Woman, although they both have slightly different names. And we get to see all of the DC heroes here, slightly different versions of them. In West Side Story, you have got the Sharks versus the Jets as, you know, this Puerto Rican gang and this American gang feuding over the area that would eventually become Lincoln Center. Well, here you have the Marvel characters and the DC characters feuding as to who has the best comics. But unfortunately, we have Doctor Strange has fallen in love with Wonder Woman, who gets in the way. We see them each singing a parody of the song America. So I will go ahead and sing it. I'd like to be in a Marvel mag, never a drag in a Marvel mag, plotter never sag in a Marvel mag. And then the DC characters respond with nothing but brag in a Marvel mag. And they sing, I think I'll go back to Brandeck. Marvel says, you could do better on Star Trek. Everyone there will applaud me. Everyone there reading Stan Lee. I think this is hilarious. I think that this is wonderful to see these Sondheim lyrics get parodied into a story of Marvel and DC. It is so much fun. I really like the way they do Wonder Woman as this sort of flirt. Everybody's in love with her. Green Lantern's in love with her. It's sort of a joke that instead of an invisible plane, she has a flying ketchup bottle. They all get in a huge fight while we work our way through the songs of West Side Story, and they parody all of them. There's a mag for us, somewhere a bag for us. Coexistence without a care waits for us somewhere. Anyway, I think I'm off tune there. But I realize off tune in both senses of the word. But so then at the end, Shakespeare shows up and it's like, I actually wrote Romeo and Juliet, which this is based on, and I'm going to exercise a copyright claim. And they're like, oh no. Wonder Woman says, by Neptune's beach blanket, how could I have ever loved a mystical madman like him? I'm going back to a real hero, namely Rotten the Boy Blunder. Doctor Strange says, for this, I gave up Medicare, as he gets wonked on the head by the Comics Code approval sign. I absolutely love this story. What did you guys think of the story? Let's start with you, Douglas. What did you think of this story?
Real funny. That's all I got to say. Really enjoyed it.
It's so funny.
Yeah, it's tons of fun. And yeah, doing the lyrics to all the songs. Yeah, you're right. It does feel very, very Mad Magazine in the best way.
Yes. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the final story in the book, With this ring, I thee web. Stan Lee devoutly wishes this is one story he didn't edit, and Gary Friedrich and Marie Severin don't want the blame for it either, but Al Kurzrock unabashedly admits he lettered it because he didn't know any better. So we have Marie Severin penciling and inking herself here. She disappeared off of Doctor Strange, and now we know where she went. She has been doing stories in almost every issue of Not Brand Echh. I really miss her from Doctor Strange. I loved her work on Doctor Strange, but I think she is having the time of her life over here in Not Brand Echh, and I can't begrudge her for it. Spider-Man is in love with somebody, we don't know who, and he's going around acting like a lovesick fool, both in his personal life and as a superhero. I'll just jump to the end. It turns out he's in love with the Wasp, and he's going to show off his new love, the Wasp, to Aunt May, and Aunt May grabs a fly swatter and kills the Wasp. And she's like, says, I have big news for you. There's something I've got to show you. And he's about to show her the Wasp, and she says, all right, kid, but first let me do something. Hold very still. Got it. Swats the Wasp dead. And she says, nasty old flies carry germs, you know. Now, what was this big news you had for me? And Peter just slunks away, says, forget it, Auntie, and bring me an Alka-Seltzer. The end. I love this story, too. Douglas, what did you think of this story?
Really enjoyed it. So Marie Severin was kind of famous around the Marvel offices for doing funny little drawings of everyone and everything just around the office. And this is her in full-on comedy mode. Like some of the poses that she's got for Spider-Man are just hilariously like Spider-Man, but what if a Spider-Man pose was funny? I love that.
Right.
Also, the final panel is her doing the final Ditko panel of Ditko's last issue of Spider-Man.
Oh, right.
With Peter walking up the stairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good point. I love Marie Severin's lizard. He just looks very lizardy, not that human. And then the last thing I'll point out is that Peter Parker's sweater is a Charlie Brown sweater.
Oh, is it? I hadn't noticed that.
Yep.
Yes, You're right. He's wearing a Charlie Brown sweater the whole time.
Yes.
That's funny.
Yeah. Anyway, that's about it. Thank you for making us read this particular issue. We have been missing out, and it's nice to go ahead and be exposed to it.
Yes, this is really delightful. Did you have any final thoughts on Not Brand Echh, Douglas?
I don't think so, but thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, we have covered 10 books from February 1968, and I think we've discovered a lot of great stuff. Probably my favorite book of these 10 is Not Brand Echh, but there's been some other really good books in here. Thank you so much, Douglas, for coming out and doing this. Did you have anything else to add about February 1968?
Just thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody out there. If it weren't for you, then we would just be talking into the void. And, we were glad that you are out here listening to us. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And I guess that's it from me. Thank you, everybody. Take care and stay safe out there.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.